Good morning, everybody. We're very excited about today's presentation, Opportunities for Trade and Investment with Africa, and our guest speaker, Toyin Umesiri, who will introduce in a couple of minutes. I just wanted to let everybody know this event is being co-hosted by two different World Affairs Councils, the Nebraska World Affairs Council and the Indiana Council on World Affairs. So we're very excited have a joint operation here. So I'll just take about a minute and explain who the Nebraska World Affairs Council is, and then I'll hand it off to the president of the Indiana Council on World Affairs, Larry Semino, to say a few words about what they do. And then we'll hand it off to the moderator, who will introduce the speaker formally. So my name is Michael Adams, and I'm a director of the Nebraska World Affairs Council. We've been around since 1972 in various iterations, so we're coming up pretty soon to a 50th anniversary, which is exciting. We're a nonpartisan, nonprofit membership organization, and our mission is to provide educational programs and engagement opportunities together with partners to our three targeted sectors, which are students, young professionals, and community leaders. We hope that they will become competent, informed global citizens in this very complex, interconnected world that we all live in. We encourage, above all, citizen-to-citizen diplomacy, which we feel is a way to promote peace and mutual respect so that we can all thrive. Why does Nebraska even really care about world affairs? We're a small rural state. We're 37th in terms of population in the U.S., but in some export categories, we're in the top 5. And hopefully we'll talk about some of that today. In fact, exports in Nebraska provide 62,000 jobs and represent 9% of Nebraska's economy. Our programs at the Nebraska World Affairs Council range on topics such as food security, conflict resolution, climate, U.S. foreign policy, human rights, international trade, cultural heritage, and many, many others. But you get the general idea that what we're focusing on. I invite all of you to follow us on Facebook and learn more about our programs and events. Global citizens are needed here. Please consider joining us. Thank you very much. So I will now hand it off to Larry Semino. Larry is actually originally from Omaha. He's now in Indiana, and he's president of the Indiana Council on World Affairs. So Larry, tell us a little bit about your organization.
Thank you, Michael, and good morning, everyone. And on behalf of our Indiana Council on World Affairs, I'd like to extend my greetings to Ms. Toyin Umesiri and members of the Indiana Council, as well as the Nebraska participants. And I want to thank Laura and Michael Adams for this opportunity to partner on this important program. I spoke with the Indiana Economic Development Corporation before we signed on, and they're quite interested in expanding Indiana business ties in Africa, especially regarding foreign direct investment opportunities. And so we really believe this subject's important to our Indiana businesses and a valuable opportunity to learn about trends in African governance, civil society, and culture. Coincidentally, I'm actually coming to you today from Omaha, which, as Michael said, is where I grew up. And I'm spending a little bit of time here with my mother. So for more information about our Indiana Council on World Affairs and all of our programs, please take a look at our website. It's indianaworld.org, or our Facebook page. Now, our next Distinguished Speaker program will be on Thursday, November 19th, and we'll be featuring Dr. Norman Sartorius. He's the former director of the Division of Mental Health at the World Health Organization, and he'll be coming to us live from Geneva, Switzerland. So if you're interested in the role of multinational organizations, particularly in this time of pandemic, I think you'll really enjoy this program. Our Indiana friends will be hearing a little bit more about this next week, and if you're interested, find us on our webpage. Anyone else? So I want to welcome everyone, and I want to just turn this back to Laura because I'm excited to get on with learning more from our distinguished speaker today.
Thank you, Larry, and hello, everyone. Good morning, and I have the pleasure of serving as the moderator, and I also serve as a senior advisor for the Nebraska World Affairs Council. And I'm going to say Toyin's bio, and then we will let Toyin open it up with her slides, and then we look forward to a wonderful dialogue of questions and answers. Toyin Umesiri is the founder of the acclaimed Trade with Africa Business Summit and the CEO of Nazaru LLC. She spent over a decade in corporate America at both Walmart headquarters in Bentonville, Arkansas, and Whirlpool Corporation HQ in Benton Harbor, Michigan. As CEO of Nazaru LLC, she connects business stakeholders to African markets through trade and investment facilitation, market insights, trade events, consulting, and training. Toyin also serves as ambassador for Intra-African Trade Fair by appointment of the African Export-Import Bank, AfrEx-Imbank, and the African Union, the governing body of the 55 African nations. And I just have a few ground rules so everybody behaves this morning. We would love you to keep on mute so we can have our full focus on Toyin, and tell if you're asked to speak up for a question. Please show your video so Toyin can see you if you feel comfortable, no pressure if not. And we're gonna have our chat section really where you can just house your questions, and I'll be moderating, I'll be looking at those as well, and so will other members of the team. And then finally, we just asked you to be kind and respectful, and we look forward to this great conversation. Toyin, are you ready to go?
Yes. Wow. Thank you so much. I want to thank you, Laura, Michael, Larry, the team at Indiana, and both the Indiana and Nebraska team. Thank you so much. This presentation is quite unique because I actually put it together just for this group. The reason is because I really love this group because you're already globally minded. So I don't have to convince you to think global. You know, we talk about act local, think global. So my PowerPoint, I actually designed it specifically for everyone on this group because I want to get past the why Africa to how. How do you engage? What are the sectors? What are the opportunities? So thank you so much. I'm going to quickly run through my slides because I really love Q&A. I want to know what's on your mind, and I've already seen some amazing questions, so I'm super excited to get to the meat of this as well. So give me a moment to just pull up my slides right now. And I hope you can see it clearly. Awesome. So the first message is Africa is the future. Why is Africa the future? When you think about the data, the statistics, all the trends that we're seeing right now, it does show Africa to be the next economic frontier after China. So let me point a few things that are going on right now. From a data point, when you think about World Bank data, IMF data as well, the region of Africa, so the continent of Africa, with its various nations, the population is now projected to double, which is currently at 1.1 billion. It's being projected to double to 2.2 billion by 2050. And this is a population growth that they've been monitoring, where while other Western nations have been shrinking in population, when they look at the population of the continent in the 1980s and its current population and the trend, it shows that more babies are being born, right? So if you're in the baby industry, I know there are a lot of activities happening in that space, like everything that supports birth of the new population, that creates new opportunities for people. Also, prior to COVID-19, African nations, like the African continent, actually had about 6 of the top 10 fastest growing economy. We all know the impact COVID-19 has had on economics around the world. But what that really means is that the pace, there's a fast pace of impact in terms of policy adjustments, World Bank doing business indexes. The speed at which policies were being implemented and adopted was really growing faster on the continent. And it doesn't say that the continent is where it needs to be. It just shows that there's change happening at a rapid pace in certain regions on the continent that calls for global attention. You also think about the youth population. Between now and 2050, there are going to be 1 billion people added on the continent. And right now, the statistics say 60 to 70% of the population of Africa actually is within the youth, under 35. So that shows that in terms of the population and the workforce, the productive center of the future is actually going to be on the continent when you think about the aging population of
Ya tomaste una
other
pastilla para
regions.
esto, my baby.
Okay.
Estaba leyendo que está
When you
mejor
also think
tomar la
about
pastilla para esta en la
agriculture,
mañana.
Vicky, can you mute yourself? Sorry.
so when we also think about agriculture right now, there's a lot of work going into that space, and the continent actually has the world's 60% of the world's remaining arable land. And when you think about food security for regions that currently are strained in that aspect, there's a lot of activities happening, because when you then grow in population, those food insecurity issues become more dynamic. So it becomes a very, very important topic in terms of the focus on agriculture is really, really massive on the continent, and it creates opportunities. Because one thing I tell people is, if you're trying to find a way to engage, listen to the aspirations of Africans. So if you listen to what the African nations are trying to accomplish vis-a-vis agriculture, you can easily see, okay, what products do you have? What technical capacities do you have? How can you support that growth of the agriculture space sector? So that's something very, very important right there. When you also talk about urbanization, a lot of that is making people from the rural parts to move into cities. There's now a growing middle class. When you think about the advent of technology and mobile phones, and you think about what's going on in Kenya with the adoption of technology, with blockchain, with mobile technology, there are actually regions on the continent that are actually outpacing the rest of the world in technology adoption. So those are some of the things that people need to watch out for as well. A lot of times before mobile phones were introduced on the continent years ago, people looking at the numbers would say, oh, can Africans afford it? Well, guess what? That's been proven that people are affording, the affluent, the middle class, they're buying 2-3 cell phones. They're now, buying cars and all of those things, which creates dynamic opportunities for global players that are looking to
Es verdad, porque hay muchos
engage. So again, fast pace of urbanization. When you think about the real estate industry, there are regions right now that there's a shortage of housing supplies. We've done some work in terms of connecting affordable housing solutions to the region, because that's something that a lot of the governments are looking at. There's a shortage of affordable housing on the continent. And this probably the last point on this slide is probably something to really look at when you think about policy management. Last year, 2019, Africa nations under the African Union did something incredible by signing the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Africa now represents the world's largest trade bloc, and there's a whole lot of work going on in that space, and we're super connected to this activity, which leads me to my next slide to show some of the things we are doing to bring more information to people. So before I go there though, a lot of times people ask me, what are the growth sectors, right? What are the opportunities? What sector? Guess what? Every area is growing. That's what this slide is about. People want to know, we talk about healthcare, creative industry. There are conversations we have about the movie industry and, Tyler Perry connecting the continent, like Kenya to the American movie industry. There's mining, there's logistics. We talk about the Linking Africa plan. The reason I'm talking about this is we host an annual summit called the Trade with Africa Business Summit. We're now in our 4th year. And each year we talk about all of this, is from manufacturing to agriculture to education to energy to infrastructure development to trade financing. Like last year we had Export-Import Bank of America and then the African Export-Import Bank come in and share with us in terms of how they support driving increased US-Africa trade. So if you're asking me what sectors, I would say you pick. There's just so much work going on across board right now. And in the follow-up slides I'll be sharing a little bit more. So what do we do at Nazaru? I know Laura shared a little bit about my background, but for me, I came into this conversation strictly from a commercial standpoint. I spent time in corporate America. So when I came into this conversation, I realized that there was a lot of hate versus trade. And basically I said, you know what, my thing is commercial. How do we talk about trade, which is buying and selling? How do we talk about investment opportunities, FDI, all of those things? So at Nazaru, we've been on a journey of building platforms that allows us to connect interested parties back to the continent. We have the Trade with Africa Network, which is a global network of stakeholders that we now train. We do a lot of global events. We've moved it more digital now with COVID-19. We also hold the annual Trade with Africa Business Summit. We've also now recently launched an exporter business listing, because a lot of times people want to know, where can you find people, who is doing what, how can we start building relationships? And with the AfCFTA, which is the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, I recently hosted global leaders at the AfCFTA roundtable, where we had chief economists of the World Bank, we had the African Union, we had United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, we had Brookings Institution. We had them talk to us about the current state of the adoption and implementation of the AfCFTA. We have all of this content available on our platform. We have tons of content, because what we know, what we've come to see is that there's room for us to engage with people, but there's a need to show people how, and that has to do with a lot of hand holding. We also partner with the African Union in increasing adoption of the AfCFTA and the implementation. I also serve working with the Afro-Exim Bank, which is the multilateral. It's the bank owned by about 50 governments, and they're responsible for financing export import, just like the US Exim Bank. And one of the things that the African Union and the Afro-Exim Bank, they're working on, which I'll show more in detail because I serve as an ambassador for that engagement, is realizing that in order for us to activate the AfCFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, there's a need to bring key stakeholders together. And in 2018, they launched the first ever intra-African trade fair. So that's the IATF at the bottom of the screen. The next IATF is going to be in 2021. But what I want to show you, because this is what you're not going to see on TV, on the Western TV, I want to show you a video, quickly a video of clips from our engagement in 2018 of how we canvassed the continent, of how the African Union and the Afro-Exim Bank is connecting private sectors. I'll show you that video because now we're also working on ramping up the 2021, because for people to engage, you have to show up. You have to show up to this dynamic engagement. So permit me to show you about a 5-minute clip of the IATF 2018 activation, and then I'll share with you what we have planning to show people what's actually going on, because you're not going to see this on the Western media. Okay. Tell me if you can hear me. Okay, so the reason I showed that video was because I was actually present on ground for the IATF 2018, and I'm also part of activating that for the 2021. The reason is because as I was in Cairo, Egypt for the 2018, I looked around me. I looked at the exhibition hall, the massive exhibition hall, and there were over 1,000 exhibitors, and I did not see American companies. So I flew in from America, but I saw Chinese companies, Italian, like people from all over the world exhibiting, connecting, doing business, doing trade, engaging. Like, my goodness, nobody in America is seeing this on TV right now. like nobody's talking about this. And here am I in Cairo, Egypt, at one of the most important engagement, because that event brings all the key stakeholders together. Because from a business engagement standpoint, you could go from country to country, right? Trying to establish partnerships, engagement. But the reason the African Union and the Afro-Exim Bank put this together is to fast track those engagements. So the next one is going to be in Rwanda. It's being hosted by the government of Rwanda, and on December 2nd, I'll be doing some more activities with the Afro-Exim Bank and showcasing what we're going to be doing next year. I'll be hosting it here in Chicago for them. In 2018, I actually hosted an event in Chicago for the bank, but with COVID-19, we're now going virtual. So one thing I also wanted to share, the slide we're looking at, I'm going to pull it up a little bit now, but it's a slide from one of the classes I teach, because when people come in and say, okay, what are the opportunities? How do I dive in? This is a slide that I teach from a class, a master class I teach called the Trade and Investment Facilitation, just to help people understand, like, where do you want to play? So on the left, I see trade. You talk about trade. On the right, you have investment. When it comes to trade, buyer-seller relationships, which are you the buyer, are you the seller? Because there are opportunities on both sides, or are you helping to facilitate that conversation? There's opportunity to help with market access development, market access strategy. Then there's export promotion on both sides. So US promoting its products to the African continent, and the African continent also promoting its product to US and global stakeholders. On the investment side, there's investor relations on both sides. I'm actually now, based on some partnership with World Business Chicago, we're planning an activation for Chicago Africa Engagement March of 2021. So next year, we'll be unveiling more things in terms of connecting Chicagoland more to trade with Africa. So we're going to look at specific sectors, like we talked about the movie, like in Kenya, for example, the person in charge of, everything media, everything that is showed on the TV screen is looking for global partnership in terms of in that sector. And Chicago was like, hey, we're less expensive than Hollywood. You can shoot some movies here. So we're going to be doing that March of 2021. So this is just a slide again that I use to drive people when I'm talking about trade and investment facilitation in terms of trying to get people to go into the weed. So for me, that's important. It's important to say, okay, why Africa? Why now? What are the opportunities? How do you engage? And then sharing what we are doing and saying, hey, Africa is on the move. It's on the move. It might take a couple more years for media, the Western media, to really cover what is happening. But hopefully that video tells you that Africa is not waiting for that. And I'm super excited to be part of that movement. This is a picture of in 2018, my first ever Trade with Africa Business Summit. We hosted it in Arkansas. And Walmart was one of our sponsors. Tyson Foods was one of the sponsors as well. And we talk about agriculture, retail, e-commerce, technology. It was a 2-day event, 2.5 days actually, because of the welcoming dinner. But yes, so Nazaru is committed to Africa. I'm super excited to step into this space. I consider it an underserved space. And, we help people. I have lots of stories to share, but I really do want to spend time answering questions that we have on mind. So I'm going to stop right there. I'm going to stop sharing and I'll hand over back to Miss Laura. Yes, thank you, Laura. What questions do you have for me?
Wonderful. And we have some great questions coming in our chat, and we had some questions that were provided prior, but just to get into more specifics. So we covered the why now, just this changing narrative in Africa. And really the audience is from the trade opportunities, which specific countries on the continent of Africa do you think are the most promising for trade with the US? Was one of the initial questions sent in.
Yes. And now that I stopped sharing, I just saw some of the chat that were trying to tell me about the audio. So I apologize about the audio.
That's okay.
But I can share that link, the link to the audio for people who want to follow it. So this is what I say. It depends. It depends on what it is you're trying to accomplish, because there are various maturity levels based on if you're looking at technology versus agriculture versus infrastructure versus energy versus telecommunications versus mining. So for example, if you're thinking about technology, you think about Kenya, okay? You think about Kenya in terms of even the US and Kenya, they're working on some free trade agreements right now. I believe this week, Kenya just did some preliminary signing with UK just in time before the British exit completely went into effect completely, right? So if it's technology, you think about Kenya. When you think about healthcare, you think about South Africa is quite sophisticated. Nigeria really, because of the population size, it's ripe. And we also bring speakers when it comes to healthcare, particularly because of the size of Nigeria. It's about 200 million people. So healthcare need is massive in that space. When you think about commodities, you think about, depending if it's export or import, you think about Cote d'Ivoire, you think about Ghana, right? So, in August, when we had the virtual summit, I actually had the managing director of the American Morocco Chamber of Commerce share with us in terms of what they're doing with solar energy. Morocco now has the largest solar farm in the world. People don't know that. So she shared, because they don't have natural resources, like they don't have oil. So they've had to lean into clean energy, and in terms of their, their expansion in solar. One of the things they also shared with us in Morocco is that Morocco is actually used by US company as a launching pad into Spain. So there are different things happening. People are using different regions on the continent for different positioning or depending on the strategy. But one thing I would just say to look at would be the risk reward. Look at it from a risk reward lens. There are regions that is it high risk, low reward, high reward, high risk, high reward, or low risk, high reward, low risk, low reward. So that's the lens that I would encourage people to look at it. We do support our clients. So if you have specific products or specific sectors that you're trying to penetrate the region on, then you can start laser focus on the continent. But under the AfCFTA, I encourage people to now have more of a continent-wide strategy. In the past, you would be looking nation to nation, South Africa, Kenya. But now you almost want to start looking at the continent of establishing in one region, but having an understanding that you want to expand.
Wonderful. Thank you, Toyin. There's a lot of excitement over here. So I want you to continue to look in this chat. But there's been two from Kenneth and Barbara. They're asking about China. And we have, hold on, the chat's moving very fast. How important is China in building Africa's infrastructure? And then Barbara asked, the locals seem to have the belief that the Chinese investment had no strings tied to it. What is your impression?
Okay, so the second question, I would say the locals don't believe that. It's more of how do you play your options, okay? So I try to explain this in an interesting way. Let's just say the US and the West is Africa's former boyfriend. And then there's a new boyfriend in town that is vying for Africa. But I think Africa is sitting in a good place to say Africa has options, right? And they get to decide how they want to play, who they want to play with, and under what terms. Granted, part of the training, because I do, in partnership with African Union, I do train government officials. Just a couple of weeks, I actually trained government officials from 14 countries. So we do advise them. If you look at the screen, what I said in terms of legal framework, the map I shared before, I talked about the legal framework. We do nudge them to make sure they understand what it is they're signing, that they do not just sign the future of Africa away. So, being an African, it just says at this point in time in history, Africa has options and they get to decide who they want to play with. So that's the way I see it. Now, it's just like boyfriend. You might love this person and you don't love their boyfriend, right? You don't love who they're rolling with, but it's their choice. But like I said, personally, there are things, because we do play some advisory role. So in some of the advisory role, we're able to say, hey, check this out, but again, the future of Africa will be determined by Africans.
Thank you. And to everyone, they didn't get your email so from the last slide. So if your question doesn't get answered, Toyin, we can share your email. But for our honored guest with Larry, I would like to see if Larry he sent in some questions prior. Larry, is there any that specifically pop out to you from her presentation?
Well, one thing I was curious about is I understand that the African Union has set up a representational mission in the US, and they had an ambassador. I don't know, could you tell us what the status is of that mission, whether a new ambassador has been named? And then what role would they play in facilitating some Pan-African trade opportunities? I mean, is it an opportunity? I mean, there are 55 countries in Africa, and a lot of Americans couldn't tell you the names of the states between Nebraska and Indiana, much less what those opportunities represent. So what resources, whether it's through you, whether it's through the representational mission in Washington, what opportunities are there for someone to help pull those together and help companies not have to learn how to do business in 55 countries, but how to do something that's more of a one-stop shop to enter the larger African market?
Yes. Oh, wow. I love that question. We usually talk about the one window in terms of if you're looking for information, where do you go to? So when it comes to the African Union, I can talk about the work we do. So I work both with the Home Office in Addis Ababa. So last year, 2019, the ambassador for, it's like they have various departments under the African Union. There's a department responsible for trade and industry across the continent. And the commissioner for trade and industry, who is the ambassador, His Excellency Ambassador Muchanga, actually flew in for my engagement last year. And he came to Chicago with two other members of his team and his senior advisory team. And the reason we brought him on board was because of the AfCFTA, because his team is responsible for implementing, the creation, the adoption, the implementation of the AfCFTA. So whenever any nation ratifies the AfCFTA, it sits on his table. So he kindly, graciously came into Chicago to give us an extensive presentation. So that's one. In addition, because we've established the AfCFTA roundtable to people have to stay abreast, because it's like it's a moving train. It's moving really fast. January 1, it's going to be when people will start trading. Originally, it was October, but because of COVID, they moved it to January 1. So from the AfCFTA roundtable, we pulled on them again, right? So that's why the content is available. So I pulled on a special advisor to speak on the current status of the implementation and adoption of AfCFTA. So the AfCFTA roundtable is my attempt every quarter, every 3 months, we're going to be having that roundtable and pulling on them and saying, hey, what's the progress being made? In December, they're having an extraordinary summit with all the heads of state. It will be the final, yay, we're good to go, January 1. So that's something we work with the Home Office on. Now, when it comes to the Washington, D.C., they've not established a new ambassador, but they have what they call a charge d'affaires. It's like a French name. And that's the person I currently collaborate with. And through him, we're able to work with the African embassies in the US, because that's his responsibility. That's his coverage area in terms of communicating, messaging to the consulates, the African consulates, and the African embassy. So that's he governs that, and I collaborate and work with him as well. We also have another growing representation that most people do not know about, and I work with them as well. So there's the embassies in DC, but there's the consulates that is located across US, right? So for example, when I did the Trade with Africa Summit in Arkansas, all my engagements would be under a particular consulate, depending on what country. Now, when I moved it to Chicago, I'm having to work with different consulates. So the consulates are probably more important to you outside of DC. That's one of the things I try to tell people. So the consulates in Chicago, they are more hands-on when it comes to private sector engagement, whereas the embassies, they lean more on diplomacy. That's what I have found, okay? So so now the African groups of consuls general, they are now all coming together outside of the embassies, and their chairperson is the Honorable Ben Okoye, in the Consul General of Nigeria in New York, is the chairman of the Consuls Generals of Africa. And I've spoken to that group before. So they are just different players and they do different things. But I say in private sector, I would almost encourage people to lean in heavily on the consulates. It will be easier for you to reach them than for the ambassadors who govern more on diplomacy. So that's my 2 cents.
Wonderful, Toyin. We've got a lot of excitement still in the chat, and I put your email and your websites in the chat so people can follow up with you. But
Thank
now
you.
to try to get all the questions in, Michael, our other host with the Nebraska World Affairs questions, he had some questions about the export piece. Michael, would you like to ask that question? And then we'll try to keep burning through the rest of them.
Toyin, thank you very much. That's very useful information, a lot of new information. In the chat room, I listed the top 10 export products from Nebraska. This is 2019 data. Top 10 exports from Nebraska, and also the top 10 export categories from Indiana. I'm just to sort of help us, those are our strengths. I'm interested to know those particular product categories. Which ones do you feel we should prioritize for Africa? And I gather that it depends on the product and the country, making that match, technology
Yes.
in Kenya and so on. And really, from Nebraska's perspective, if we look at the top export markets, really the primary one in Africa is South Africa. And then it drops way down after that. So I know there are opportunities there that we have to just match countries and products. So it's not something I know you can fully explain now, but maybe following up, that would be useful.
Could you help me list it, because I've not been able to find that list? Could you just list the top, call out the top 3 or top 4, and maybe I can respond quickly to that.
Okay, so for Nebraska, we're very agricultural oriented.
Yes.
And some of those categories were in the top 5 of the U.S. states.
Okay.
Soybeans would be number 1.
Mm-hmm.
Beef, meat that's typically frozen, as well as some live animal exports. Corn, of course, and then agricultural equipment, harvesters, threshers, irrigation equipment, and so on. And so those are the primary ag-related ones. Okay. And Indiana is also an ag state. Maybe I'll let Larry talk about that. You want to say a few words there?
Yes. Okay.
So yeah, quickly, I'll just list a couple of the top exports from Indiana. And while we are a big ag state with corn and soybean exports, also the top export would be medications, various automobiles and automobile supply chain parts, transmissions, and so forth, and gas-powered trucks, airplane engines, and the rest really have to do with medical, whether it's medical devices or automobile and airplane parts and engines and so forth. So more a better mix of both agricultural and some very high tech, particularly in the healthcare area.
Okay. Okay, fantastic. So the first thing I will tell people to watch out for is, do you want to engage B2B or B2G? Meaning, because there are times when the governments are the ones trying to put in some interventions, and your potential customer for any of those things would be governments. But there are also times when it's another business, a private sector on the other side, that is trying to establish an industry and needs your equipment or your seeds and all of that. So that's the first thing, because a lot of times in the past, people lean more heavily on the government, but what's going on is that the future of Africa is more on B2B. Just like with China today, a lot of the deals with China today, maybe at the beginning, it used to be government that could only afford, but now you can actually just go straight to a private sector in China and do a business. So that's the first foundational thing, right? Then let me just share a few examples. Maybe this will ring some bells. So Tyson Foods, right? 1 in every 3 chicken is, in the US, is from Tyson Foods. The former CEO, Donna Smith, we sat down and he's spoken at my event before. Some of the things he's doing, he went to Rwanda and he wanted to do a demonstration farm. And the Minister of Agriculture said, no, that's not what we need. What we found here is that we do not have enough feed meal. The feed for our livestock, for those chicken, is actually missing. And what he did then was he built the first feed mill in Rwanda. Now, what's going on is, since he built that feed mill, 2 other investors have built 2 more, because Rwandans weren't saying we wanted charity. They were saying we can't find where to buy it, right? We cannot find the right feed mill for our livestock. So that's why I tell people, listen to the aspirations, listen to what those nations are trying to achieve, and then insert your products. So soybean is huge, definitely. Wheat, yesterday I did a session with my network, and we were talking about wheat. Wheat is huge. You'll be amazed that the way you use wheat in the US is not the way some African countries make it. They actually use it more like mashed potatoes, and they eat it that way, which is different. But I think you can't go wrong with agriculture, whether it's poultry, whether it's beef. I think finding the right strategy to insert it into an existing need. So just like in business, you have a solution, you need to do a research in terms of who are my customers, who are the potential clients, is it a government, is it a private sector, and then how do we structure, is it a partnership, are you looking for distributors, or are you looking for partners, or you're just looking to sell outrightly? All of those things is what excites me, because then we go from trade with Africa and we narrow it down to actually trade transactions. So you can't go wrong with agriculture. You talked about healthcare. Healthcare is huge when it comes to, equipment, technology. There's so much going on right now. And even in the government, they're trying to look at, affordable healthcare and all of those things that US already does. Like, who's going to pay for healthcare? Is it the employer? Is it the government? Those are things they're now trying to figure out, because cost of healthcare is high everywhere, but they're also trying to see how to implement that. One thing I encourage people, when you think about the normal curve, we're just at the very beginning, and the people who insert themselves in the conversation today are the people that are going to be positioned to win. Because if you're in the room, if you're showing up and you're part of the dialogue and you're showing up with your solutions, your products, then when it's time to buy and transact, you'll be the first person they're thinking about.
Wonderful. Toyin, there's a lot of positive feedback on a wonderful presentation, and I'm going to try to pack in 3 questions, separate questions. And then once again, everyone, feel free to email Toyin directly. And thank you again, Toyin, for all of this knowledge. So the 3 I'm going to put in for you is, Penny asked, which companies are leading with trade in Africa? The second one that I thought you could touch on is, what are the largest challenges still in Africa currently or in the near future? And then Rich Giro made an announcement that Joe Biden was confirmed president. I haven't been watching the news, and he's a very active time right now for everyone. And he said, do you expect U.S.-Africa ties will be strengthened under President Biden?
Okay. I think the last question is even the easiest one. It's yes. It's, when you think about the legacy of the Obama administration, when you think about the relationship under Obama, the relationship was strengthened with AGOA. I don't know, has anybody heard about AGOA? Okay, let me quickly just explain this. In 2000, the year 2000, President Clinton and the U.S. government established the African Growth and Opportunity Act. And what this is an opportunity for products coming in from Africa, about 5,000 to 6,000 products coming in from Africa, to be imported into the U.S. market free of tariff-free, free of duty, and without quota. It was for a length of time. It expired. President Bush extended it, and then it almost expired, and then President Obama extended it again to 2025. So looming right now is with the Trump administration is, we know for sure it's not going to be extended anymore. So with the Biden administration, for sure, Africans would see that as a positive, definitely as a positive. So AGOA, because a lot of time people talk about U.S. exports, and we feature opportunity in terms of Exim Bank, the U.S. Exim Bank. We actually have presentation materials from the headquarters. They came in and they explained how Exim Bank drives trade with Africa, how they have working capital export financing, export insurance, all of those resources. They explained it in detail, and we have that content if anybody is interested. So those are things that I would say we're all looking at right now. Now, the other question around what are the challenges? I will talk about challenges from an aspect of trade, and I'll also talk about challenges from a reputation. So there's reputational challenges, right, that we all know about. But from a trade standpoint, the biggest challenge I would say is trade information. Lack of trade information. It's that market research is hindered by lack of trade information. And those are some of the things we're telling the government to look at from a digital disruption, making trade information accessible digitally, right? Even in the era of COVID-19, a lot of them weren't as prepared to go from, meet me in my office. For those that have operated in Africa, you have to be right there to touch. They have to see you, touch you before they would do anything with you. But now that we're all having to operate virtually, it's a big change management for the African nations. So for you to be able to pry their hands and say, put that information online. We need more information as investors are seeking where to invest, as exporters are seeing where to market to. Those information, it's not readily available. But I know that Afro-Exim is also doing a lot of work in that aspect. So for example, yesterday during my weekly engagement with those on my network, one of the questions came from Canada, and they were like, what was the top import items in African countries? I was like, that's a good one. I told him it's easier for you to actually do a research on top 10 imports into Canada than it is to find into Africa. So those are some of the challenges we're seeing. And then reputational, when you think about instabilities, political instabilities, there's several election. This is an election, just like with US, what's going on in the US right now. We have that also. Ghana is going through an election year right now. You have things going on, popping up here and there. That people are monitoring and trying to manage. That remains an issue that has to be navigated. And that's why I tell people, make sure when you build a strategy, don't build it around one nation, diversify. I think there was one, did I answer every?
Yeah, the last one, and then we'll have a few minutes. We're almost done. We've done great with time. Yeah. If there's any leading companies that's trading with Africa, just to roll off of your head, and then I'll let Michael and Larry close us out, if that sounds
yes
good.
What I would say, I like to use analogies a lot. It's that a lot of people for centuries have been playing in the field on the continent, but they've not been showing people the score, right? So they've been on the field, Coca-Cola, the Procter & Gamble's. When you think about let me just talk about Cadbury. Cadbury is a 195-year-old company, but most people do not realize that Africa produces 40% of the cocoa or cacao, depending on how you call it. The cacao in the world, 40% of cocoa comes out of Africa. So a lot of global industries have actually emerged in the last, based on commodity items coming from Africa. Africa produces about 50% of the cashew in the world, but you do not know because the cashew is exported out of Africa into Vietnam, Southeast Asia, processed there before it comes into the US market. So some of the work we're also trying to do would disrupt some of those supply chains, because Africans are now working on industrialization, infrastructure development. They're going to say, oh, that cocoa, we now know what we want to do with it. The cashew, we now want to roast it. We're trying to industrialize as well. So stay very close to AfCFTA. It's going to be the most important trade policy, I think, in my generation. And I'm super excited in terms of what it means for Africa and the future of Africa.
Wow, thank you, Toyin. I'm sure the audience would stay for hours and just listen, and we could get all the questions, but I know I appreciate it, and so many great comments. Michael and Larry, do you have any final comments in the last 2 minutes of our presentation? Michael first.
Thank you, Toyin. That was fascinating. I think people are amazed at how the statistics are really emerging very quickly. So on behalf of the Nebraska World Affairs Council, I want to thank you for really a fascinating and helpful discussion. And thanks for all the attendees today for tuning in. We'll post a video of today's event on our YouTube channel in the next few days. And I should mention that our next Zoom World Affairs presentation will be next month, December 2nd. And it's also going to be Africa related. The topic is Rwanda, a tale of one man's courage in the face of the genocide. And it's a story from a person who was the only American who stayed behind during the genocide to help smuggle food and medicine into all the orphanages there during the genocide. So for a full list of all of our events, please look at our Facebook site, Facebook/Nebraska World Affairs. And thanks again, everyone. We hope to see you at another one of our upcoming events. And I'll just turn it over to Larry.
And I'd like to echo Michael in thanking everyone for an interesting conversation. Toyin, this was really fascinating. Having worked myself in Africa quite a lot over the last 30 years, I can really reinforce what you say about personal relationships being extremely important. And I would encourage people to do that and maybe take advantage of new technological opportunities to do it. I would welcome you to provide us with contact information, particularly as how we might lean on you to learn how to approach different markets in a particular way. I think being representatives of American companies, we obviously have to conform to the American Foreign Corrupt Practices Act that has traditionally created some challenges in working in Africa, and organizations like yours and others can help us navigate an appropriate way to do business, to take advantage of the opportunities that are there. So thank you for what you've done, and look forward to a continuing conversation with you in the coming years.
Oh,
thanks everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much. And one way that I've actually started solving that is through the Trade with Africa network. It's actually digital, and we have over 500 people in that network of learning, growing, supporting one another. And then what we then do is we bring resources into that group. So for example, December 2, we're bringing the bank, and the bank, the reason I keep talking about Afro-Exim Bank, it's a multilateral that is owned by about 50 countries. So engaging and seeing what they are doing with the government also tells you where each of the governments is going. So thank you so much, Laura, Michael, everyone, Larry. Such an honor. You know, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Toyin. And everybody's giving their praises in the corner, and I put all of the contact information. She'd love to hear from you directly. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you.